A couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege of witnessing my colleague, the Reverend Joshua Daniel, Associate Rector at St. Columba's, perform the entire Gospel of Mark from memory. A stage telling that was simple and spare, but unexpectedly piercing and effective. When I walked into St. Columba's nave, an usher kind of encouraged me to sit anywhere, but that they need some people to sit in the transepts on the side, up close. I thanked the usher and sat in a familiar front center pew, grateful for familiar surroundings. As I waited for the play to begin and I took in the space, I looked up at a sign that was fastened on the wall right beside my pew, and it was labeled, "Strong men, scribes, Herodians, Pharisees, priests." So I studied the program, and I realized that the seating had been carefully arranged into 4 sections, each representing a group in Mark's gospel. I was seated about there, and across the aisle represented the seating for the disciples. And to their left, in the side transept, were the Judeans. And in the other transept, to my right, was the Gentiles. At the front of the church, the altar stood almost bare, except for 2 large vessels placed on either side of it. According to the program, the one on the disciples' side was called the cup of salvation. The one on my side was called the cup of death. Yeah, I felt it right away. Regret at the seat I had chosen. I was envying right away the seats over there that seemed like the safe seats, the faithful seats, the seats of the people who left their nets and followed Jesus, the ones who want to get it right. But instead, I was sitting with Jesus' enemies, the ones who questioned him, resisted him, opposed him. It was kind of comical, but also painfully honest. Because instinctively, we all want to locate ourselves on the good side of the story. We want to be the faithful ones, the brave ones, the ones who recognize grace when it is extended. That has been true of St. Margaret's too. Over our 132-year history, we've rightly told, stories of generosity and service and welcome and growth and ministry, stories of people who loved deeply and gave sacrificially and showed up faithfully. Those stories are real and they matter. But like the disciples in Mark's gospel, we've often only told the parts of the story of which we're proud, where St. Margaret's looked faithful and shined, while leaving our acts of harm quietly unacknowledged. As the play unfolded, something remarkable began to happen. Joshua didn't just narrate the gospel, he drew us into it. Each time in the story when Jesus encountered a new character, Joshua approached someone seated in the corresponding section, and that person would hand him a stone. And then he would take it and place it in one of the 2 vessels. Whenever Jesus extended grace and someone responded with trust, with essentially a yes, when the disciples left their nets and followed, when a miraculous healing had occurred, the stones began filling the cup of salvation. But whenever grace was resisted, whenever fear, violence, betrayal, or hardness of heart took hold, the stones began falling into the cup of death. Slowly and visibly, the Gospel of Mark was being built right before us, choice by choice, response by response, stone by stone. And as I've been reflecting on the play's significance over the past couple of weeks, and picturing these stones filling either of the cups, I realized how clearly St. Margaret's story can be traced through these two vessels. One of the earliest stones in St. Margaret's cup was laid before the church ever even began construction. The wealth that helped found this parish flowed directly from the labor of enslaved people. John Little, whose farmhouse stood a block from where I'm privileged to live in the rectory, in what is now Kalorama Park, he enslaved men, women, and children. When emancipation came to Washington, he petitioned for compensation for human lives treated as property. And when he died, his wealth passed on to his daughters, including Sophia Little, one of our founders. Sophia herself was not an enslaver. We do not know her heart. We know she gave generously. We know she helped build this church. We know that she was so well regarded that when she died, the parish at the time chose to dedicate the pulpit to her memory. And yet, the stone remains. The grace of God was present at St. Margaret's founding. But the wealth that birthed this parish was bound up in the suffering of others. And the stones did not stop accumulating there. As the neighborhood around St. Margaret's changed, as Adams Morgan and Columbia Heights became home to more black and brown people, families, this parish largely remained white and affluent. Not because of a rule written down like in other parts of our city, but because of comfort, because of culture, because of who felt welcome and who did not. When the civil rights movement reshaped this nation and leaders like the bishop, the dean of Washington National Cathedral, other clergy in the neighborhood, when they showed up, St. Margaret's was not found in any of the news coverage. We were not out in the marches. We were not challenging segregation. Stone by stone, our silence added to the weight in the cup of death. But of course, there were stones of grace as well. When this parish fed the hungry, opened doors to neighbors in need, founded Charlie's Place, reached beyond itself in compassion and service, elected and appointed a more diverse body of leaders, stones fell into the cup of salvation as well. Today, we name these stories not to condemn our forebears, but to tell the truth about our life together. As rector, I apologize for the ways this church was founded with wealth bound up in enslaved suffering. I am sorry for the silence that we chose, comfort over courage. I am sorry for the ways we served without sharing power, helped without mutual relationship, welcomed without being willing to change. And I want to add clearly that this is not only about the past. To the Black and brown and other members of color of this parish, and to all people of color who have passed through St. Margaret's doors over the generations, I apologize for the ways that you have not always been fully seen, fully heard, fully valued, or fully centered in the life of this community. I am sorry for the moments when you carried the burden of educating us, for the times when your pain was minimized, for the ways whiteness has remained the unspoken norm. These harms did not end with emancipation. They didn't end when the parish became more racially diverse. They've lived on in culture, in comfort, in silence, in whose stories were told and not told, even in the images pictured in our beloved Tiffany windows. For all of this, I am sorry. But the play, as it progressed, it did something I didn't see coming. I think I had unconsciously kind of been keeping score in my head. Religious leaders, my section of the seating, they poured into the cup of death. Yep. The Romans, yep, they poured into the cup of death too. Violence, fear, resistance, stone after stone. And the disciples, surely their actions all belong safely in the cup of salvation. Well, as the story moved closer to Jerusalem, the stones began to go back and forth. When the disciples argued about greatness, when the disciples silenced children coming to be blessed by Jesus, when they repeatedly failed to understand, instead of seeing the beloved community Jesus was trying to build, they saw obstacles and inconveniences. When they fell asleep, when Jesus asked them to pray, when they ran away, when things got dangerous, stone by stone, even the disciples contributed to the cup of death. And suddenly the neat lines that I had drawn in my mind disappeared. There were no safe seats in the sanctuary. Everyone, religious leaders, Romans, crowds, disciples, everyone carried stones. Everyone contributed to both cups. Because Mark's gospel refuses to let us pretend that evil resides only over there. Mark tells the truth about the human heart, that we are all capable of responding to grace. We're all capable of rejecting it. We all carry stones that fill both cups. And if that is true in the gospel, then that is true in the life of a church. That there's no congregation who only pours into one or the other. There are moments of extraordinary grace and moments of devastating silence, moments when we follow Jesus boldly, and moments when we choose comfort and safety and self-preservation, stone by stone. And then there was this moment that just broke me open. We call it Palm Sunday, when Jesus triumphantly enters Jerusalem on the donkey, and then he immediately goes to the temple and overturns the tables. Well, at that point, Joshua took the cup of death and threw it down on the floor in front of the middle of the altar, and it scattered into pieces, loudly echoing. Only the cup of salvation remained. And then the passage that I chose, which Francisco read later, when we reach the story of Jesus, what I call Jesus' second to last supper, at his friend's house, Simon, on the outskirts of Jerusalem, in the poor slum called Bethany. Mark tells us of a woman who approaches Jesus with an alabaster jar of costly perfume. And the disciples scolded her for her waste. But she ignored them and broke open the jar and poured it out on Jesus. In the play, as he was narrating this section, Joshua took the cup of salvation, filled with all of the stones of every moment of grace, every act of healing, every yes to grace extended, and he poured it out right on the altar, right where we gather for the Eucharist. It was as if to say that every yes to God's grace across the whole story finds its home here. And what did Jesus say of this woman? She has done what she could. Not perfect faith, not flawless discipleship, just love, abundant love poured out. Here we stand, holding our own stones, as a parish capable of great love and real harm, a community where grace has flowed and where our silence has wounded. And the question before us is not whether we have a past. The question is, which cup are we filling now? For such a time as this, when injustice is no longer subtle, when cruelty is written into policy, when silence has become a form of violence, stone by stone, will we keep adding weight to the cup of death through our fear, avoidance, and comfort? Or will we pour our lives, imperfect as they are, into the cup of salvation, choosing truth, choosing courage, choosing repair, not perfectly, but faithfully and together? She has done what she could. May that be said of us, St. Margaret's. Amen.